Hello and welcome back to our very first Instagram Live Viewer's Choice build. Now you know we usually scour through the YouTube comments and look for the most popular builds and choose what builds we're going to make next from there. However, this time we decided to do something a little different. We decided to have a series of live videos on Instagram and ask you the viewers what specific video game item you wanted to see build next, and then have a discussion about each and every request and come to a conclusion. And that conclusion this time was that we were going to build the Lothric Knight Sword from Dark Souls 3. In Dark Souls 3, it's said that the Lothric Knight Sword is one of the best, if not the best, straight swords in the game. It's a great thrusting weapon and cutting weapon, so Ilya and I were very pleased that this was the sword that you guys chose for us to build because it's rather realistic. However, in the game it's not only used as a two-handed weapon but also a one-handed weapon, and I think it's a little too hefty to be used one-handed, but we'll just have to wait to the demos to see how it performs both two-handedly and as a one-handed weapon. If you guys would like to participate in the next Viewer's Choice videos that we do live on Instagram, be sure to follow both Ilya at Slavicsmith and myself at Stagmer on Instagram to make sure you don't miss out on those live videos. Now in Dark Souls it's said that you never really win, you just get a little bit better each time you play the game. Let's find out if Ilya and I can defy the Dark Souls lore and conquer this build on our very first try. To get the build started, we have to size some 1045 to a very specific size. That's because the 1045 is going to act as the cheeks of our blade, and we're going to insert a very high carbon 80 CRV edge that will be forge welded in once our 1045 is sized. With our 1045 now cut into two pieces, it's time to insert our high carbon edge and begin forge welding the two alloys together. The initial forge weld has to be solid on our very first try. Unlike working with other materials, there will be no hot cutting and folding to refine any inclusions that could be in the billet. This has to forge weld one time and be drawn out into the blade. If there's any inclusions, the blade will simply fail.
When making sword blades, I generally prefer to stay away from monosteel blades and choose laminate. The advantage of a laminate construction is that I'm using a medium or low high carbon steel on the flats and a blade steel like 80 CRV or high carbon steel in the center, where up on the grind my high carbon or blade steel shows up as a thin paper thin layer on the outside, but the medium carbon steel or low end of high carbon steel is on the flat, preventing a breakage. So my sword will be more like a spring, and remember, spring steels are not blade steels technically, but I have on the edge a steel designed to be a blade steel.
With our basic length now established and our point drawn out, it's time to flip the blade over and start forging in our ricasso and tang sections of the blade. After Ilya began drawing out the tang, he realized he didn't have quite enough material to draw out the length that he needed. So he's going to do what a lot of smiths of old did, which is lap weld some extra material onto the tang. He'll forge weld it both on the hammer and some by hand, and then begin drawing the tang out. You may be thinking that this may decrease the structural integrity of our tang. However, upon further review of many antique weapons, we have noticed a forge welded on tang is present in almost all of them. With our tang now forge welded and drawn out to shape, it's time to begin forming our fuller. In this case, we're going to be forging the fuller into the blade using a spring swage. You may be wondering why we chose to forge the fuller in instead of just grinding it. That's because we need to gain a little bit more width in our blade in the top section, so forging the fuller in like this actually spreads the material, makes your blade a little wider, and then afterwards when you move on to beveling the blade, you'll gain even more width. Proper hammering technique is crucial when forging the bevels on a straight sword to make sure it doesn't corkscrew or bend one way or the other. If you'd like to see more on the correct technique of forging in your bevels, be sure to check out our Your Edge video dedicated to the topic. With the edges of the blade now forged in, it's time to start forging in the hooks, or perhaps you'd call them the spikes that lie beyond the ricasso of the blade. Alright, now that we have our blade forged, it's time to do a little bit of perimeter grinding before we can do the final straightening, final grind and heat treat. Basically, my goal is to take out any of these little bumps, define the tip, and define our hooks that happen just beyond the ricasso. I'm going to be doing all that work on our Broadbeck Ironworks grinders, so let's get to work. One of the great things about our Broadbeck Ironworks grinders is the versatility. You'll notice that I'm using several different sized contact wheels that I can change very quickly, which doesn't slow my progress and increases my time efficiency as I work. Alright, now that the blade has had its final straightening, normally we would go right to heat treat. When you forge a blade this close to shape, it's plenty fine to go straight to the heat treat. However, if you look at the sword in the game, it has a very as forged or scaly texture to the blade. So what we're going to do is we're going to polish out the fuller completely before heat treat. That way when we heat it up for the actual heat treat, we get a little bit of scale in the fuller itself. We'll leave it as that, polish it out. We'll still have to figure out some texture on the flats, but it'll save us a lot of time doing the fuller first. Let's get to grinding the fuller. If hollow grinding horizontally just isn't your thing, with these Broadbeck grinders, you can turn them a whole 90 degrees and grind up and down as well, all without turning the sander off, once again, increasing your efficiency. I myself don't really have a personal preference. I mean, grinding is grinding to me. However, the versatility of this grinder comes in very handy during many processes. With the fuller now polished out, I have to do just a little bit of grinding on the flats to make sure that the thicknesses are the same from side to side so we don't get any warping during the heat treat. So to heat treat our sword, we're going to be doing something a little different. You haven't seen us use an electrical kiln yet to do any heat treating because we're pretty good with controlling heat in either the charcoal or the gas forges. However, Even Heat sent us this amazing 49.5-inch kiln. It's the largest model that they produce. They will do some custom sizes if you want larger, but this is all digitally controlled. We literally type in exactly what we want this to do, how long it comes up to heat, how long it stays there, all of that. So we're going to start by placing this into the kiln, let it come up to the desired temperature, and then we'll do just like we always have and quench it in either oil and water. In this case, we're going into oil. You can see that the temperature is steadily rising. It's so well insulated that you can place your hand all around the outside, so there's no danger of lighting anything else in your shop on fire when this is on. It'll stay on as long as you tell it to and come up to the heat pretty quick. One of the really cool features about the Even Heat kilns is that this particular model has Wi-Fi built into it. So you can download the app on either your phone or on the computer, and you can control it for long overnight soaks, whatever you need your material to do. Alright, you can see that we're almost up to temperature. Just about ready to put our blade in. After the quench, I clamp the blade between two 2x4s to prevent the chance that it could warp while it cools slowly.
To make the guard for the sword, I'm going to use a combination of wrought iron and pure iron. The reason why I'm choosing those materials rather than anything else is because they forge weld easier, and I want to accomplish an almost hollow guard construction to reduce a lot of the weight of the sword.
To make all three sections of our sword guard, we're working from the same bar. However, we first have to cut off the square section that will have the tang slot hot punched in the center, and then start forming the other part of the bar into the cheeks that will be forge welded later. To begin forging the cheeks that will be forged welded on, Ilya is using a top tool underneath the power hammer to create two scoops on either side of a central point. Now that all three pieces of our guard are forged, it's time to put them together as one. We'll be heating them up in the forge, and then forge welding them together. While the work continues on the guard forging, the blade has now been heat treated and tempered, and it's ready for its final grind and polish. Now that our blade has been ground, polished, and sharpened all the way to a nice satin finish, it's time to add an antique finish. In the game, this sword looks like it's been through a lot of abuse, so now we have to do a couple techniques to make the blade look aged. Part of that antique finish is going to be some ferric chloride dip, and then we'll do some other very specific techniques afterwards.
Perfect.
That one hurt a little bit. While the blade antiques, it's time to move on to forging the pommel. We basically have to draw out two tapered points on either end, then we can move to the grinder to do the final shaping. create the scallop section in our pommel, I've now attached a narrow wheel that you see me cut a lot of fullers in with onto our broad bed grinder, and I begin cutting in the designs directly into the face of the pommel. While we have the narrow wheel set up, we're going to start cutting in the details onto the guard of the sword.
This specific sword has a round handle cross section, and if you're making a symmetrical sword like a long sword or a short sword, you want to stay away from a round cross section. The reason is it messes up with your edge alignment, so especially in a longer blade, you will see the blade starting to flex even before it hits the target, and that's because you're starting out and there's already inertia, and then as you hit the target, that inertia gets transferred onto more flexing. So as a result, the round handle will be detrimental to the slicing abilities of the weapon. However, it does not interfere with any thrusting motion whatsoever, and that's why daggers as well as rapiers very often than not have a round handle cross section.
In the game, it appears that the sword's handle is made out of solid steel. To create this look, and to keep the weight reduced, we're forging our handle out of some pipe. When forging pipe, whether it's underneath a power hammer or by hand on an anvil, it's very important to rotate it evenly and be very patient during your forging. Otherwise, the pipe can become lopsided and you will lose all of your symmetry. To create the risers on our handle, we've tack welded 2/4 inch pieces of round rod onto the pipe itself. We can then form the round rod over the pipe, and then we can forge weld them seamlessly, making it look like everything was made from one solid piece. Alright, now that all the pieces of our sword exist, it's time to turn our steel guard and pommel into brass ones. The way we're going to do that is use our brand new Harris torch, heat up our steel pieces, and then use a brass wire wheel to then coat the surface with brass. Let's get started. Turn it off. And I gotta. This was a great sword build in general. It showed a lot of different techniques. However, it made it super sweet knowing that this was a fan's choice build, so we went the extra mile and made sure that all the textures and all the surfaces of every single piece of this sword was spot on to the game. Now there's only one thing left to do, to see if this sword is as dominant in real life as it is in the game. Well, that was a great build, and this sword performed a lot better than I thought it would. It is quite heavy because it has an all steel handle. However, the steel handle pulls that balance point back a bit towards the pommel side and allows it to actually be fairly usable with one hand, but is most certainly a two-handed weapon. Make sure you follow us both on Instagram at @SlavicSmith and at Stagmer so you can participate in the discussion on our next Instagram live videos. Thanks for watching, and as always, we ask you to subscribe to That Works.